Okay, we can go with those. You've worked quite a lot in government, or you worked a bit in government. I think you said you got disillusioned with it, but you've worked in this area for quite a long time with health and with public policy, and it would be good to hear from you the challenges working with public policy and generally with your work at the Centre for Social Justice and your insights into this whole area.
Yeah, so probably worth starting on what it feels like to work behind enemy lines, really. It feels like in government at times, with a couple of stories. So the first one, I was an expert advisor to the Secretary of State for Health in the UK for a couple of years. I say to the Secretary of State for Health, we had about 5 in 3 weeks at one point. It was during that particularly inauspicious period of changed every week. But the first thing I was tasked with was actually adult social care rather than children's care. And I went around government looking for great ideas for how we could enable families to look after their own families, particularly looking at elder relatives. And we went to Department of Housing, looked at intergenerational housing, we went to Department of Work and Pensions, looked at carers allowance, and came up with 6 or 7 great ideas we thought were cost neutral. And then sent them up the ladder to senior politicians to see these 6 ideas. And within a day, we had a flat no to every single idea. And it was on the basis that every single one of those ideas, however good and however cheap, might incentivise women between the ages 50 and 65 to leave the workforce. And so it's just to reiterate, we're talking a bit about the economic incentives around this morning, that they are absolutely inherent in the system. We are governed by the Treasury, and the Treasury's primary motive is to get women into the workforce. So a second story similar to that, related to it, was a couple of months later, the government announced its plan for 30 hours of childcare from 9 months old. I would stress not my department, but it was one of the departments. And I immediately thought I need to try and find out how this has happened. So you met Frank Young this morning. I immediately phoned Frank because that's what I do. And Frank said, let's phone Erica. So Erica, I don't know if you remember, we had a Zoom call with you from the department. And Erica brilliantly sent me this spreadsheet of the best research that she had to try and take to the team within the department. And so I went clutching my spreadsheet to the mental health team, the Department of Health, and said, look, have we considered what this might do? Have we considered the downside? And I was told, no. I said, well, you might want to consider this. And they said, well, we'll take it under advisement. And as I got talking to them, it wasn't just that they considered them, it was that they didn't even understand, they didn't understand the concept of attachment theory. It wasn't, this is the mental health team within the Department of Health had never heard of it. And so you have this situation where it's not just the economic imperative, but the knowledge and the culture within government is so unaware of this. It's the complete antithesis of it. And I realise that sounds unbelievably depressing, but I do want to say it as a sort of encouragement that you guys are on the front line of this stuff, and that if you weren't doing it, no one would be doing it. And so it is really important that you keep your voice up. I think it probably feels a lot like sort of David versus Goliath, and that's because it is. It is. I would encourage you that David did win, and so you need to keep plugging at that. Within the bounds of what is necessary, what is possible, so I work at the Centre for Social Justice. We have lots of family policy, and the 2 that we've been pushing for 20 years now, one which will never happen and one which has. The one which I just can't see happening, but which I think is important, is this idea of front-loading child benefit. It's something that's been around my for a long time now. We give out cash to parents of children up to their sort of late teens. But we would just, without spending any more money, you could front load it to the first few years and just give parents that choice we've been talking about whether or not to work. The reason that won't happen again is because that might encourage women not to go to work, which is what we want to happen in terms of giving them choice not to. But from the Treasury's point of view, I don't think that's going to get over the line, certainly with this government. The one which we get more traction with is family hubs. So we came up with this idea of family hubs, and essentially that is just services for families. If we're going to destroy family life, can we at least put in support services for families to go and get supported? And that is something that has started up now. There are more than 100 around the UK. We've spent several hundred million on them, and we are pushing for that to go further. So that is realms of acceptability.
I think from mothers at home matter, just in terms of our support groups, I think that the feeling of being isolated and having no support is such a strong feeling, and I think that is a really important thing. And I think, Olivia, you're here, you want to say a few words on that? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Well, I'm from Family Hubs in education, so the family back was reading the organisation report yesterday about like where it was mainly about family hubs as a concept and the name you mentioned as well, which is quite interesting. Across part of the vision. But anyway, yeah, I think I don't have loads to say on family hubs, other than obviously we massively advocated from the central government's point of view. Has a lot of policy support, and yeah, obviously we're hoping to also expand the programme if we can. But I probably will pause there. That's probably as much as I want to say.
Thank you.
Sorry.
One other area I would flag, and I'm conscious I'm saying this is a mothers at home math thing, but I want to talk about fathers very quickly. Fathers is a family of mine. We have a major problem with fatherlessness in the UK. We're doing some work at the moment looking at outcomes for boys and young men up to the age of about 25, and actually hot off the press. This morning I've just had some polling results in that we have done with young men, and 60% of young men versus 50% of the general population say that fatherlessness is one of the biggest problems they face. So the young men are saying it more now than the general. It's not something that is coming from older people with family values, it's coming from the younger people now. 2/3 of young men say it's the principal cause of behaviour in young men. Again, higher than the general population, that is what young people are feeling. And the reason I raise fathers and mothers at home maths conference is it's very, very hard to be a mother at home unless you have engaged fathers. But actually, when we talk about support, we look to the state. The best support you can have is the child's father. And ultimately, the area of policy that I am passionate about as a result of this is marriage. Because if you can't get men and women to work together on this stuff, it will just not succeed. And we are in a terrible place. Okay. In 2022, we for the first time had the larger number of adults are not married and married. But worse than that, the majority of children were born outside a married couple. And your outcomes on that basis are just worse in every single instance. And it is a particular thing that we are unable to talk about in politics now. It has become this sort of verboten idea that marriage is important, but it fundamentally is, and children know it, they see it, having committed parents, huge difference. So I encourage you to make that part of your activity.
Thank you. Maybe simply, can I just quickly, well, if you want to kind of, you're looking at fathers as well, fathers and sons. If you want to, I don't want to put you on the spot.
No, sure, I can. I don't need to sit here. This is Mark. I did my PhD on fathers in the University of Edinburgh. And the idea is like, I connect with the topic because I work in the corporate world. And I had like a simply conversation with my boss, and I realized that he missed one of his daughter's party for being with a supplier in a non-important meeting. And then I realized here there is something interesting that we need to try to understand. And it's this care ambition, and on fathers it's there, but we are not able to share. So like the idea with the PhD was to try to understand fatherhood voices, try to visualize this caregiving ambition, and then try to understand the barriers and limitations that sometimes makes fathers not able to share, to experience this caregiving ambition. What else? I spent 1 year at Harvard in the Center of Women and Public Policy program, where they have been research on women and how to empower women. But the idea was to try to understand, okay, but what fathers say about all of this? And we edit the book, and I can share with you, we have a lot of attention in the sense that for being an academic book, we have more than 200,000 downloads. And the idea was like to put like here in the same room, 5 medical doctors doing research on fatherhood, 5 scholars on social policy doing research on fatherhood, and 5 scholars on the business schools trying to understand what can companies can do to promote engaged fatherhood. And it was like a super nice conversation because we can never be together. So it's super difficult, like for a scholar in social policy to go to a conference with medical doctors, or medical doctors cannot be in the Academy of Management. So it was like a good opportunity to discuss the same object of the study, which is fatherhood, which by the way is interesting, not only for the rich constellation of positive outcomes for children, spouses, society as well, but also because it's in transition, and because it's going from one place to another one, and because it's in transition. So it's nice to put our effort to understand where it is going. And then finally, because some men, although it's not easy to understand, but they suffer, like my boss, and I connect with the beginning about this topic, but they are not able to express. So I have interviewed more than 100 fathers, and for some of them, it's like the first time that they talk about the topic with another person. So they are not able to talk about with friends. So another thing is to open new avenues for men to express themselves about this caregiving ambition.
So, yeah, they will be with us. In our ways. I'm just sort of away, Kingy, I know you have to go, but not, no. Okay, so if I bring David and then Kinga, and then hopefully we'll get,
Okay, so I first became interested in some of these issues relating to family and motherhood when I wrote a book in 2017 called The Road to Somewhere. I was looking at the over-domination of our politics by people I call the anywheres, the professional graduate class, who tend to look down on domesticity as belonging to the past of women and society. And even relatively mainstream views about the importance of family and family stability, I realised we're not really represented at all in the political class. As I said the other day, the only people who seemed to take up these issues were cranks and Christians. It is a little bit better today, partly thanks to you, Anne, and Civitas, but organisations like Pregnant Then Screwed, the Early Years Alliance have vastly more influence and have the ear of policymakers much more, many times more than we do. Partly because, as I was saying, they are running with the grain of the employment maximising priorities of the Treasury and the whole political class, really. The left has not really been sympathetic to these ideas since the 1960s. The left tends to have a pretty blank slate view of the differences between men and women. Men and women are not only equal, but essentially the same. The left tends to prioritise women's employment, is not particularly bothered by family structure issues, keen to obviously create welfare support for non-traditional family forms, single-parent families, particularly, regards daycare as both, pretty as early as possible, as both good for children and for mothers. The Tory party, who you might expect to be more sympathetic to some of the kind of what I would regard as pretty mainstream ideas about the family, particularly Tory moderns, in recent years have been very keen to adopt a pretty leftish position on the family. Partly for one might argue, the rather good reason that politicians are more sensitive about hypocrisy now than perhaps they would have been 50 years. And actually, we had quite a good example of this just the other day. I was mentioning this last night. Even the great disruptor force in British politics at the moment, the Reform Party, you might think, you know, that the family issue is lying there to be sort of picked up by somebody. You might have thought that the Reform Party might, and actually they do actually have a reasonably good programme on some of these issues. But Farage being interviewed by Jordan Peterson at the ARD conference, he was invited by Peterson to talk about his ideas about family. He said, "Can't do that. I've been twice divorced." You know, and that really is not a good enough reason to avoid talking about these vital issues. And I think, contrary to the idea that the ideas about stable families, making it easier for one parent to stay at home when children are preschool, you know, encouraging moderate pronatalism, that rather than these ideas dividing liberals and conservatives, they ought to really be bridging issues between liberals and conservatives, because what are regarded as sort of small c conservative ideas about higher fertility, stable families and so on actually often require quite liberal means to make them compact. Real choice for young parents about balancing work and childcare, more equality in the home, and tends to, historically, it's been quite good for higher fertility, and better jobs for non-graduate men, which is not necessarily a left or right idea. And the other thing you might say about the politics of some of these ideas, and we sort of touched on this morning, is the precautionary principle, which is normally an idea associated with the liberal left. When it comes to environmentalism, we can't possibly do anything that might, you know, endanger the environment. The precautionary principle is completely thrown out of the window when it comes to child development and daycare, the impact of daycare on children's behaviour. The precautionary principle absolutely nowhere to be seen. But I think there are, Edward mentioned front-ending of child benefit, and the other policy that I'm very keen on, that I mentioned in my newish book, Care Dilemma, is this this idea of a home care allowance, a little bit like the home care allowance in Finland, which I'm sad to hear has been cut in recent years, despite its popularity. But you know, some sort of home care allowance, you could easily get to a figure of about £10,000 a year by essentially taking that £9 billion of childcare subsidy and giving it direct to young parents, giving them the choice about whether to use it on themselves, grandparents, formal daycare. If you combine that with front-ending child benefit and recognising family in the tax system, you could give families a real choice that they don't have to vote. This is not going to happen in a hurry, because, you know, as we've been discussing, the grip that GDP thinking has on our not just our policymakers but our public. And you know, we know that the GDP is not the same as well-being, and it's pretty clear that the Treasury are focused on the short-term maximisation of jobs and tax income and GDP growth, even though we are kind of eating our seed corn by making it harder and harder to create stable, productive children of tomorrow. And I think this is what is going to save us in the long run. The economics of collapsing fertility, people becoming more and more aware of it, and that is going to force politics to listen to actually what mothers want, because we are going to need mothers to have more children, and then I think a lot of the policy ideas will flow back into the system. So it is worth us thinking about them, working out in more detail how they might work for when the moment comes. But I fear it feels to be a while ago.
One main argument for not giving parents money that on the other side is that parents can't be trusted. What would you say to that? But they spend the money on, alcohol and.
Well, it is true of some parents, but there's a phrase lawyers have about, something cases make bad.
Hard cases.
Hard cases make bad law. I mean, why should public policy be determined by, 5% of dysfunctional parents? I mean, it doesn't really make sense. You could say that, you could say that about any cash benefit. And say, you could take child benefit away from them. No, I mean, I think we have to assume that the vast majority of parents, and with support from relatives, to some extent from the state, parents should be allowed to parent. But there is a huge bias particularly from not just, but particularly from the left, that kind of the desire to take children away. I mean, a lot of our childcare and early years legislation comes out of the Victoria Climbié tragedy at the beginning of the century. The early years foundation, a lot of that. There was a paper, Every Child Matters, and this was New Labour Times, and they talked about 1/3 of all children in the UK being vulnerable, disadvantaged children. One third. I mean, this sort of the desire to sort of get their hands on those children, take them out of families as much as possible. That is a real problem. It is sort of ingrained in the bureaucracy and our politics.
So every action has an equal positive reaction, and we've become really bad at vocalizing what are the sacrifices you make when you make a policy. So this is a classic example where we are sacrificing children on the GDP, and to switch it, we need to be really explicit about what sacrifice we're going to make the other way. But either way, we've got to become a lot more explicit about these are the sacrifices we will make. So there is a 5% that will do terribly. It's like we cannot cover that through childcare. We try and cover it through family hubs, but we can make that change and acknowledge that that is a problem in order to have this thing of 95% of people.
Yeah.
Seems to have been an enormous technological advances over the last 10 years, the last 100 years, 150 years, which we've repeatedly been promised that we'd all work a 4-day week. So why is there such a workforce shortage? Is it real? Do we really need to be going?
No, I don't think we do. We have one of the highest employment rates in the developed world. Our employment rate is 75%. Down a little bit from 2019 and 76%, way ahead of lots of other countries that have far higher growth, far higher productivity than us. We need to focus on the things that actually government now are focusing on. Over-regulation, making it possible to build the houses and factories and laboratories where we need them. And that is what will create growth, not pushing hundreds of thousands of young mothers into the workforce who far prefer to be at home, or indeed importing hundreds of thousands of low-skilled immigrants who are in the long run going to cost us more. That already just over half the population take out more from the system over a lifetime than they put in terms of tax income and the use of public services, and particularly the switch since Brexit towards much lower skill non-EU immigration. Almost all this so-called Boris way is going to be negative for UK PLC. So no, I mean we know what creates there's quite a high consensus among policymakers and economists what creates economic growth, and stuck in the labour market would have rather for reluctant mothers is certainly not one of them.
Given that we have this session with growth of GDP and maybe for the last 30 years, it's not been real growth, but a transition from the back into the paid economy. So, mothers were working, it's just that
Yeah,
you can see where there's a transaction, it could be counted as growth.
yeah, yeah.
Is there any way of measuring what is done in the home so that it looks like it's economically active
Well,
and that it's
yeah.
actually worth?
The ONS does actually look at, yeah, I mean, GDP, if we included in GDP, all of the productive caring work done in the home, it would be about 2/3 higher. It would be, I mean, the ONS has these parallel numbers. I mean, it doesn't make a huge deal of it. Well, every now and
Why
then,
don't we do it though? Why don't we
well,
simply
yeah,
say we
every
do
now and then
growth?
people do, I mean, it was the American economist Stiglitz did a big report, Charlie Bean for the Bank of England. Every now and then there's a sort of interest in this, but it sort of fades away. I mean, I think, this is one of the things that we should keep moving away at. I mean, just to produce, maybe every time the GDP figures come out, have parallel figures. And it's going to get, I mean, the distortions in our policy decisions are going to get worse and worse as we become a more and more aging society with low fertility. More and more productive work is actually being done in the home. And what you're going to see more and more is, people, say, professional person on a decent salary, £100,000 a year, say, for simplicity's sake, with an elderly parent who's desperate, who needs care, not necessarily every hour of the day, but needs care, can't look after themselves anymore, desperately doesn't want to go into a home.
Mm.
That person moves from 100,000 a year to 50. They work part time, so GDP loses £50,000, and yet well-being goes up. Certainly for the old person, and possibly for the person who's had to give up some of their work. And the state will also potentially save on the costs of looking after that old person. And yet that will be counted as a minus. And we're going to see more and more cases like that. So GDP is sort of more and more distorting our decisions.
I'd like to just bring it in now, because we've talked about the UK and Kenya's worked about 15 years on the EU Council, and I'll probably forget the full title, the Economic Social Council, the Economic and Social Committee. And you've been quite involved with the creation of policy, and it'd be really interesting to hear from you about the creation of policy and the unintended consequences, but also having the ideals and then creating the policy.
I will jump into that topic as well, but since you mentioned the unpaid care, how to measure unpaid care, I don't know if you're familiar with the International Labour Organization, the ILO. Of course, the UK is also a member in the ILO, and they do measure this unpaid care in terms of the GDP. Will allow me, I will do 2 sentences because I just searched very quickly on the web page. So the ILO estimates that the value of unpaid care and domestic work to be as much as 9% of global GDP, with women's contribution at around 6.6% and men's 2.2%. And of course, they go on and they do this measurement of unpaid care, but then they always come to the conclusion that this is preventing actually women, this big contribution of unpaid care is preventing women to contribute actually to pay work in terms of pay per work GDP. So this is usually the conclusion that the labor organization is taking. I just wanted to share that there is this type of measurement. And it would be interesting to take a look at it from your organization's perspective. But then turning back to
Can I make a couple of comments on that?
especially if you're familiar on how they
methodology
and so on.
Yes, absolutely. So the first point is that estimate is estimated using minimum wage for care. So you already know that care is not only unpaid, but undervalued if it's valued, right? So it's considered low-skilled labor. That is part of the narrative and the social norm that we need to change. The other thing is that when we talk about care, there are 2 things in care, right? In this case, we're seeing care as the chores related to caregiving, right? The washing the dishes, the doing the laundry, There's a component of care which are the relationships, right? That has not been allocated a financial value. Because how do you do that, right? That is really hard. And it's perhaps the most valuable component, perhaps the most skilled component within care, and that is not considered. So now in our advocacy efforts, what we try to do is we try to create that distinction when we talk about care. It's not just about the function that can be easily replaceable, commoditized. You can always hire someone to do dishes, right? But what about the other one that is not part of the economy, but that is critical for human flourishing? So viewing unpaid care not as something horrible, but as seeing it as foundational to society's well-being.
Yeah, I think it's a very, very good point. And also, I think you need to follow up in this line. So I would just like to share a couple of policy ideas that are coming from the European Union's level that I hope you will find useful, or at least you will challenge me maybe on these ideas. But first, I would like to say that I represent an organization in Hungary which works with large families. Large families in our terminology are families who are raising 3 or more children, or who have raised 3 or more children. But we are a very inclusive organization, because anybody can be a member who agree with our goals, who would like to support large families. Supporting large families in Hungary is kind of a social consensus. There is a Hungarian think tank that does a representative survey. It has done it through a couple of years. The think tank's name is Civitas, and it has done this survey across Europe about how people perceive families. It's called Project Europe. I can share the link. And they had these questions. Do you agree? For example, is family important in your life? This is a very general question. And all across Europe, including UK, Western Europe, Central Europe, people tend to answer, more than 90% of people answer that yes, family is important or very important in my life. And then we go down to, do you agree that the state financially supports families? Then we see a little bit less agreement in this sense. In our region, there is a big the state must give support to families. When we come to Western Europe and in UK, it's a little bit less. And then there is this third question: do you agree that we should support large families, so families who have more children? And there it goes all a divergent matter in Western Europe and also the UK. It's not something that people think very important to support. In our region, it's still very much supported. More than 80% of people said, although they might not have a large family themselves, it's important to support them. So I'm coming, I told you this example to say that I'm coming, so to say, from a safe environment, and this is how I got to Brussels, to a European Union institution, which of course has a little bit different view and perspective. And there I was taking part in making these policies that I would like to speak to you about. With some of them, I am also very critical with some of them, but I do see not only the downsides, but the benefits as well. And the first one, although I know that we challenged many times the so-called work-life balance, that there is no such as work-life balance, and it's very hard to reach and achieve this reconciliation, but still there is a work-life balance directive in the European Union. And I'm mentioning this because it has 4 pillars, but one pillar is, it has already come up in our discussion, is about fathers. Is about the so-called paternity leave. And if I would have to point out one beneficial aspect of the European Union making a policy, I always tend to pick this example because before 2019 in the EU, not even half of the member states, there are 27 member states now in the European Union, not even half had any kind of leave. for fathers, or there was a leave, a possibility for fathers to take a leave, but it's unpaid. And being unpaid means it is not recognized, it is not valued. And with this directive after 2019, all of the 27 member states in the European Union have now 10 days of paid paternity leave for fathers. These are for young fathers who
10 days.
10 days, but I'm not stopping here with the 10 days. 10 days, but you need to see that this is already the beginning, because 10 days before that, there are some countries without any, no days, or some days that unpaid. And now it's 10 days, and it's in all of the member states available and recognized. And the beneficial aspect is not only to have these 10 days around the birth of the child, but apparently those fathers who use this tend to use more leave afterwards if they have the possibility to stay at home during the parental leave, which is not exclusively reserved for the fathers. They tend to take on more of this leave and spend time with the children, which I think is very, very important in the life of families, also large families. Then we were discussing about the Barcelona targets, and after speaking about the Barcelona targets, I will stop, and then if you have any questions or comments, just let me know. So I just want to debunk a little bit this myth, what the Barcelona targets are. These are some numbers that have been set also on the European level on how many children, the percentage of children who should attend or would be nice that they attend daycare, so below the age of 3, and also between the age of 3 and 6. But it's not Barcelona targets. This is, of course, the short term. The long version of the target is called access to affordable, high-quality childcare. When I say this, then it sounds a little bit better, because there are also some targets, not only on the percentage of children who should attend daycare and kindergarten, but also, for example, for staff-child ratio in early childhood education and care. And I'm not going to spend time on telling you about the percentage, because it's kind of changing, but also about the considerations behind. So it's, of course, it is linked to labor market, so employment of women. But then there was also this consideration I mentioned in the morning of the integrational aspect of especially kindergartens and the language learning aspect, and also there is this healthy nutrition, which is linked to child development that is provided or has to be provided to children in the European Union at least one day. One healthy meal a day is provided to children who are attending formal care that can be seen as a beneficial aspect. And a point that is coming up nowadays, it's screen time. You might be familiar that the earlier the child has access to screens, and the more the screens are used. And apparently, but I was trying to look for this study that was referred to. I took part at a conference, and they said that those young children, so very young children below the age of 2, who are at home, apparently they have more access to screen time than those who are not, who have some possibility of being also in a community care. But then coming to the negative side, because I see a lot of negative aspects also on forcing these targets at member states and other families, that there is no real choice for the families on to decide whether they would like to have their children in daycare, in kindergarten or not. And also the cultural background in the countries, because some of the countries tend to have the solution that they prefer, for example, the grandparents to step in. and to take care of the grandchildren instead of a formalized public care solution. And just to share with you one number that in Hungary, 90% of the children are above the age of 2 who attend daycare. So there is a very big difference between letting children be in full daycare at the age of 4 months, for example, which is the trend in Belgium. In Belgium, there is only 4 months of parental leave. And after that, children are normally are in daycare, or when you have a child at the age of 2, still below the age of 3, but attend half-time or full-time the day, which can be already something beneficial for the social development. So, and I see that somebody's and I would like to stop very much for listening.
Thank you for that.